Welcome to Sexually Charged Radio. I'm your co-host, Ruthie. I'm here with
Lauren
and
Thomas.
And we are all excited to be talking to you about a topic I don't think we've explored very much on here before. But before we get into talking about pubic hair and body hair, Lauren, would you like to give us a brief introduction to yourself? I think most of our listeners probably know Thomas and I.
Sure, my name is Lauren, and if I don't say anything offensive or that you hate, I work at the ADHD and Asperger Center as a counselor and coach, and our website is adhdinterrupted.com.
Very nice, very nice.
So glad to have you today.
Yay! So you picked out the first question for us to talk about. Do you want to read it out loud? This came from a psychology panel we did, and they gave us permission to keep some of the Q&A to talk about on the radio.
This questioner asks, is it healthier to shave my pubes or keep a bush?
Such a common question, both healthier and just like, should I? Like social expectation wise too. So none of us are medical physicians kind of type professionals. I can tell you what I've read about this. So there are some limited research studies I've seen that state that keeping, for people with a vulva, keeping pubic hair does have protective factors around infections and things like that. It can sometimes be more comfortable as well, as depending on how people react to shaving or hair removal. I've not actually seen any studies on people with outie genitalia, so assigned male at birth folks, on anything to do with their pubic hair. Apparently, we're much more interested in a culture on telling what people with vulvas should do with their pubic hair one way or the other. But I think it's not just necessarily about the health. I think it's a lot about the kind of the social implications of this as well. What have you guys heard anything about this health-wise?
So I can speak maybe a little bit to outie genitalia, because I have read a little bit in that area, and some research has found that shaving the pubic hair for outie genitalia can increase transmission of some STIs, mostly through the process of nicks and cuts, and then creating a more convenient entry point for infection to occur. So a lot of the pieces that I've read says that trimming is a safer mechanism because there's less chance of nicking, but that's the extent to which I've read up on anything in this manner. And I definitely say I would agree with your comment that there's much less information out there about penises and outie genitalia.
I'll say something first that's completely irrelevant. I've heard from a gardening point of view, actually letting your grass grow is better. And if you cut it, let it stay there and mulch or whatever. But our culture has this obsession with manicured lawns. So we're all just trying to get rid of all that grass and make it perfectly even. Okay, back to genitalia. I've heard anecdotally that porn movies from, the 70s or something, it was common for
full bush. And
I also heard from a gynecologist that there was a time when all women would come with, bushes. And then there was, I think, maybe in the 80s or some era where it just shifted. All of a sudden, it was they were all, more commonly shaved. So I want to add that there is something cultural, there is something time-specific and space-specific about this idea.
Yeah, as a kind of the history of this in North America, what I've read is that it wasn't really common to do pubic hair removal until sometime around the Industrial Revolution, when, according to what I read, sex workers were removing hair kind of from the neck down, so armpits, legs, pubic hair, and that was to help reduce the transmission or the worry of transmission of pubic lice and other parasites like that. And then the patrons of these sex workers were asking their female partners to then do the same thing because it had been exoticized and things like that. So it's an interesting history behind that, which doesn't necessarily mean we should or shouldn't be doing it, but it actually kind of just started from this very utilitarian place, and now it's become a bit of a fashion statement, an identity statement, a thing of conveying something about your sexuality, but also often a way of meeting partners' expectations, which I used to think was totally all wrong, but now I have a little bit of mixed feelings on, depending on the person who's doing it and how they feel about it.
I find it interesting that this comes from a bit of a public health standpoint, like the idea of pubic lice and and thinking just as our society has changed in terms of care for our bodies and care for cleanliness, that those things changed. And going back to your point about being situated in time and culture, that I think as we now have resources to maintain the health of our bodies and hair on our bodies, that there isn't that same need in all cases. I don't know, it's just this confluence of things.
And I'm just going to put out there, like when I was in my early 20s, I just stopped shaving my legs. I just quit doing it. And that was a very controversial thing amongst my peers. I stopped shaving my armpits too. And that was just, my peers were disgusted by that. There was a lot of body policing from female peers of mine about how I would never get a date, apparently with anyone of any gender or something. And that I obviously just didn't care about myself. I was letting myself go, all this sort of stuff. I was like, you know what? I just don't like doing it. And if that's a make or break for someone, then actually their make or break around that would be a deal breaker for me. So I'm okay with that. But it's been an interesting thing. You know, I've been in volunteering with elementary school kids, reading them stories, and I'm in like a long skirt or something. And I remember this one time where one of the kindergartner kids just yells loudly in the middle of the story, "She has legs like my grandma." And then everybody is like under the skirt trying to see my hairy legs and stuff like that. It's like, holy Moses, I don't even know how to handle this situation. I'm like desperately trying to keep myself decent while just continuing the story like a trooper. You know, it was entertaining. People have strong opinions about telling people what they can do with their body hair.
Very much so. I'm wondering if you happen to know like statistics or something about how common it is, because I've heard people tell me, you know, everywhere in all the lands, you know, women have always shaved their legs, and I know that's not true. And I've heard, you know, like in France, women let it all grow or something. I don't know if that's true, or
I don't know the statistics. I can tell you that the more I have lived in places that have more skin tone and international diversity, the less people have cared what I've done with my body hair. There's been a wider range of representations. But I think that that is just a mix of cultures coming together, some of which will care more about body hair and some of which won't. I don't think we can make an assumption about that necessarily by a skin tone or an ethnicity. But I do think the culture I came from was perhaps one of the more policing cultures. Mm-hmm. So others, by contrast, may be less policing sometimes.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as you said earlier, there's a lot more policing about people with vulvas and how they keep their bodies than, although I've spoken to men who wanted to shave their legs and were so stigmatized for doing so, and for swimmers and a lot of types of men, like it's actually, they, you know, need to, or they run faster for, you know, marathoners and stuff. So
they just like the feel. Like I actually know a few men in my life who shave everything to the knees, opposite of what you might hear women talking about in the winter or whatever, because they want people to visually see their body hair and not be judged for it, but they really don't want to have any of it. So they shave everything except the part that'll be most obvious to people.
Yeah, the manscaping movement, as you know, I just really want to call for the alliteration purposes, has really grown in probably the past 10 years, in what I can recall, from things that I've read and witnessed. Being part of the communities of individuals who are men, where that idea of body hair, you know, the rugged Tom Selleck sort of thing, you know, of the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure if Tom Selleck was still a thing in the 90s, but he's back again now. Yeah. So
does he ever really leave?
It's true. Know? He's timeless.
It's in our hearts.
That sort of body hair across the board was very indicative of masculinity.
It's like virile. Yeah.
But then, you know, we move into the metrosexual age and into the manscaping of bodies. And so you now get this policing within cis male identities around how much hair is on the body and how does that hair look and what are the expectations around body grooming. And the number or the shelf space at Shoppers Drug Marts and Rexall's given over to male body grooming products is fascinating. I used to work in such an industry, and like year after year, we would see more shelf space actually being given to razors and creams and electric razors that were not meant just for beard maintenance.
There's the one on the handles for doing your own back.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Yeah, it's, I think a lot of our industries would lose a lot of money if we were just happy with ourselves the way we were. Now, that said, because I feel like we've gone much more towards preserving body hair and talking about the virtues of that. Lube lasts longer if there's not hair to absorb it. There are upkeep considerations for growing body hair out in places where the hair grows longer. If you have a lot of pubic hair, you might consider combing it, things like that. Because if you're being sexual with yourself or someone else, a full bush can be a wonderful thing, but running a comb through it can help reduce loose hairs or just make it more organized, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that can be helpful. Sometimes, there's always those middle grounds of trimming and whatnot. And some people just really like it better that way. Like they just like their own bodies better that way. And I would hate for them to think that they can't be doing that or to be dissuaded from that. For some people, that's an important part of their sexuality too. I, as a hairy-legged person, would not feel good about myself shaving my legs. It would be a bit dysphoric for me. But if somebody feels the same way in reverse, I would hate for them to feel policed out of it.
I feel like it's similar to piercings or tattoos, or it's your body and what you're going to do to feel comfortable in that body. All the power to you in that decision, because you're the one who's going to see your body every single day and live in that body every single day until you stop living in that body. And that was a really morose statement. But I just
Then
think
you'll live in someone else's body.
I just think it's important that whatever decision you make, it feels right for you. And if you're feeling pressured by someone else, really evaluating, what that pressure means to you, because it is a lot of work to do maintenance like that.
And I want to contribute to your comment about categorizing it as an aesthetic choice, because I remember in high school a friend of mine confessed that for Valentine's Day she dyed her pubes pink and shaved like a heart kind of area, and
That's
like
commitment.
she was really excited about it. Just like there's a lot of fun stuff you can do when you have that, and it can be fun to play with yourself or with a partner.
Absolutely.
Speaking of fun things, Ruthie.
Oh my goodness. Sexually Charged Radio?
Sexually Charged
Tell
Radio.
us about it.
On 93.3 FM. You're listening to us at cfru.ca or maybe live at 93.3 FM in the Guelph area. Or maybe you're listening to us on YouTube, because you can search us at Sexually Charged and find past episodes on YouTube. And you know what, Ruthie? People can actually write in questions and comments. Did you know that?
I've been hearing such a thing, that perhaps they might write to asksc@uoguelph.ca, Guelph. And then those questions are fielded by the folks at Student Wellness, and they go through the questions, and they send some over to us, and they help with the editing, and it's a great partnership that we are fortunate to have. Lauren, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. One of the people from the panel submitted the question, is it healthy to go down on a lady? What do you think?
I am no medical doctor. It could be very healthy for the lady. And yeah, it probably yes.
Probably.
Now I'm looking forward to hearing your answer.
Thomas, is it healthy to go down on a lady?
If it's consensual, then I believe that it's absolutely healthy to go down on anyone, regardless of their gender, if that's in the desire of both or all parties, because, you can go down multiple people on one person or one person on multiple people. But there are...
I like where this is going.
That show comes later on.
Okay.
But there are considerations to make anytime that you engage in sexual behavior with another person. There are always risks associated with transmission of sexually transmitted infections.
Wait, what's that? Are you saying that oral sex is not universally safe or low risk, Thomas? It's true. It's not.
I feel like we needed like a sound effect of shattering glass.
It used to be considered a lower risk activity, and some places would even do sex ed, encouraging people to choose that over penetrative intercourse. Although I guess some oral sex is penetrating a mouth, so now I feel weird about that differentiation. But anyway, we'll keep rolling as a safer alternative. But we know that anything that's transmittable skin to skin, HPV, herpes, things like that, and it can absolutely be transmitted between mouth skin and genital skin. in either direction. But we also know that there's a strain of gonorrhea going around that they're calling super gonorrhea that is not responding to antibiotics very well, and
It's
in
like
some
the
cases
worst
not at all.
superhero name ever.
Right? I don't even want to
Or
know
villain.
what design is on the cape. Like, that's not, I don't want to see the logo. So that can be in the back of the mouth, like in the throat area, and it can be transmitted to and from penises during oral sex that's unprotected. So there are concerns around STIs and things like that, and barriers can be great to use. I know that people often roll their eyes. I'm going to say that, as I've said on the radio before, I have a lot of sex with a lot of people, and I always use barriers for oral with anyone that I'm not fluid bonded with, so that's almost everybody. And once you get in the habit of that, it's fine and it's fun, and in some ways it's better, and in some ways it's a little less personal, but the decision that we've made in our relationship is that that's important to us. So everybody assesses their own risk and what they're willing to do, but don't go into it thinking that it is low or no risk. That is an inaccurate assessment.
I'd like to ask an offshoot question, which might contradict your statement, but because this question was about health, and in this case it was about, in quotes it says, or no, it doesn't have quotes.
We'll add quotes to lady.
Lady, is there any health, would you like to speak to if there are no barriers and somebody is like tasting or possibly swallowing liquids or juices? Is there like any health, lack of health? Are there proteins in that?
Like nutritional health?
Or anything. Yeah, what's in that?
I mean, people have talked about nutritional health for semen before, which of course ladies can have penises and have semen. So nutritional value of semen has been discussed around like salts and sugars and things like that. There's not a lot of semen in ejaculation. Ladies can have penises and ejaculate too because you can ejaculate with or without a penis, but of course, being a lady or being a woman or a girl does not determine your genitalia.
So maybe the question was about vulvas.
Probably. I don't know anything about the nutritional composition of natural lubrication. There has been a lot of recent analysis on female ejaculate and what that contains, but not from a nutritional standpoint. It's just that people are really obsessed with whether it's pee or not. And whether it is its own thing and where it comes from. So I've read a bit about the contents of that, but nothing nutritional. Now, I have read research about oral sex within relationships helping people to feel more intimate and more bonded, or at least that it's correlated with that. We don't know if people who are more intimate and bonded are having more oral sex, or oral sex helps you feel more intimate and bonded. But there seems to be a link between that and relational health. Is that useful knowledge at all?
That's useful.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we do think about health in that more holistic sense. Health physically, but health in terms of relationship, health in terms of self-esteem and self-worth, and psychologically healthy. And so if somebody in the relationship deems that it's important that they engage in oral sex, and you consensually agree with that, and that's something good for you, then that definitely has health implications for a relationship health. Whereas I think, if one person has this desire and the other person has the exact opposite and is revulsed by the behavior, that relationship is going to have some struggle. There's going to need to be some communication and some negotiation about what that means. Because if somebody really wants you to go down on them, but you don't want to do that, well, how do you have that conversation? Maybe that's a good question for the table.
That is a really good question. And you know what? It used to be a question that upset me when I was younger, when I was a younger adult, in that I felt like there was necessarily implications of sexism or body shaming or things like that if a person wanted to receive oral sex but not give oral sex, especially in a heterosexual situation. But since then, I've met a lot more people and had a lot more conversations about this, and my thinking has started to evolve. What do you think about it, Lauren?
Yeah, I guess I almost side with your original thinking, which is that just from a cultural standpoint, in heteronormative conversations, I think there's a lot of attitude about it being more acceptable for women to give oral sex to men than the opposite. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a lot of expectations. There's even some stigma around, giving oral sex to women, and that is all bothersome, all of that baggage and the inequality of...
Well, and there are some folks with vulvas who don't want to receive oral sex, and sometimes I wonder if if they just don't like it under optimal conditions, or if there's self-stigmatizing going on, or negative experiences, or a partner has said something bad, or partners have not been particularly skilled in it, perhaps because there's less expectation of skill and practice in that area than there is in blowjobs. So I wonder about all of these complexities with this topic.
It's interesting you bring that up, that there's not as much expectation of skill. Because I know when I would look at the magazine rack and there'd be a Cosmopolitan, like more or less every cover article is like how to give him mind-blowing sex, how to make him amazing, whatever. And then when I looked at the equivalent, I would consider like Maxim, kind of a magazine, it was all like how to get more amazing sex, how for her to give you better. So I'm like, really, this is a consensus. Everyone agrees that women-identified folks should be giving men-identified folks more satisfaction and pleasure. And nobody cares the other way.
In the workshops I've given at sex toy stores and other places, how to please your man sells out every time. How to give blowjobs sells out every time. How to please a woman, cunnilingus workshops, poorly attended, sometimes have to be canceled for lack of attendance across the board. You can sell out nonstop blowjob workshops. You can't get a full house for a single workshop on pleasing a woman.
What would the makeup of individuals attending those kinds of sessions be?
Blowjob workshops? So with blowjob workshops, oftentimes the attendance would be mostly women, but sometimes guys who had brought her there, and sometimes women who had brought their boyfriends there, probably to flirt with them and to see it as an engaging couplehood sort of thing. So there would be this mix of folks at the blowjob workshops, people who were flirting with their partner, people who just came by themselves. Oftentimes it was women there. To the best of my knowledge, whatever was disclosed to me, I've never had a guy show up for how to give a blowjob because they wanted to give better oral sex to a guy. And that would include anyone that I read as masculine, transmasculine, cisgender, whatever. I just hadn't. So maybe I need to advertise it better in that direction, or maybe they don't want to learn that from me or whatever. Everybody's got a handle on that. For the how to please a vulva class, it would be actually mostly women there who are trying to learn how to communicate to their male partners what they need, or had not had very consistent pleasurable sex with others and were trying to know their own bodies better. So even for people who show up for that workshop were not men interested in women trying to please their partners better. So that's quite a social discrepancy and disheartening, and sex educators will often talk about how disheartening that is. And I'll plug away and do that Please in a Vulva workshop, with like three attendees, and because it needs to be there, it needs to happen. And then I end up like not even breaking even on a workshop like that. Just from a social justice standpoint, it needs to be there. And that's sad.
It is. And I think it's important across the board that whether you're the individual giving or receiving, that you can take a lot away from those kinds of sessions. And especially if they are being offered, look in your community, look to your sex toy stores, your bookstores and queer spaces to see what's offered in your community, because if they have that offered, take advantage of it.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you what does book well, though, because I don't want to make all the guys look terrible, because they're not, by any means. I would do this workshop called 12 Things You Didn't Know About Women. And it was very aimed heterosexually. That was kind of the dominant customers for the store that I was doing workshops at. And that one was always really well attended by guys who wanted to be great boyfriends and husbands. So I do think there's something in the language of things that I can't quite put my finger on at this point, but that one always sold really well. So it may also just be about direct technique. Maybe these guys feel disrespectful talking about their girlfriends and wives' genitalia. That could be the case too, in which case I'm sorry that I sold them short. We've all sold them short on these things. But even, I would like for people to feel like they can talk or learn more directly about these topics. And also in queer affirming ways where, vulvas don't necessarily mean women and penises don't necessarily mean men and things like that too, because there's very little room for that in all of this.
So maybe we have a couple minutes left on the show, and just bringing our two questions together about pubic hair and going down and oral sex. What are your thoughts in terms of best ways or best approaches, best techniques to ensure satisfying oral pleasure while maintaining the best pubic space that you want.
The best pubic space. I love it.
I just want to use that phrase.
So both these questions have the word healthier in them. And to know that there's, there are STI considerations, but when it comes to how your body appears and how you maintain it, and hair, there's not a health imperative in it. It's really the healthiest thing is knowing yourself well. And, when it comes to oral sex, be well informed about transmission and barriers and things and have that conversation with your partners. But there's lots of ways in which to have healthy or healthier oral sex if that's what's desired. So people are bringing this back to a health question, but it's also kind of a knowing yourself question and knowing what matters most to you. Maybe what your own pubes look like doesn't really matter at all to you, so you're happy to be flexible around that. That's, we didn't really talk about that much, but that's okay too. It's really about self-knowledge and feeling okay with exploration and balancing that with well-rounded knowledge of risk. Oh. What do you think?
I just love every time listening to you when you talk about this stuff.
I love it when people listen to me.
I'd add in or reinforce your point from earlier, just around cleanliness, and figuring out, again, what's right for you and what's right for your partner to make sure that you feel clean and that your partner feels that the area is clean. And that can mean having untrimmed pubic hair, but that just making sure that when you're in the shower, you are washing it out, or you take a comb to it, or whatever you feel is necessary. Yeah.
And there are plenty of people who like a furry experience on all parts of their partner's bodies. So you're defining a clean will vary by that as well. Absolutely. Too. But I guess maybe it's intentional then. It's intentionally maintained, whether that's more wild and rugged or whether it's not.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ruthie, for a wonderful conversation about pubic hair, and to our guest host, Lauren, for all of her contributions. And thank you, listeners, for listening to us at Sexually Charged Radio. Until next time.
Bye.